Welcome to another series of scary stories from Reddit. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for regular horror stories and creepypasta uploads. With that done, let's begin with the video. The Staring Man by Jedi Prime 29. So I work in the public sector where basically we have books, but they're all free as long as you have a card, if you get it, and there are a lot of patrons who can be creepy. Some are disturbed or have mental issues, which is understandable as to why they are creepy, but it still doesn't help. Now, there's a guy I used to see sometimes when I'm working, who just stares. He stares at people, anyone really. This night, he decided to stare at me. All shift. I only noticed a few times. This night I noticed that he left for the bus stop after we closed. I left for the grocery store, hoping to avoid him. When I arrived to the stop, he was there. Now, he left early enough to get on 2 different buses, before the one we both got on. At the stop, I sat down to just chill and he paced the stop, staring at me, unblinking the whole time. I'm a pretty big guy, so it takes a lot to creep me out. He accomplished this in 2 minutes. He kept staring at me until I moved. I figured if I stood, I'd be at a better angle to defend myself. He then took my seat. This bench has 2 spots, and instead of taking the empty spot on the right, he took my exact spot, and continued to stare, following me with his eyes as I kept moving around, waiting for this damn bus to show. I at one point began moving back to my work for a better area. I would rather take the creepy people around there than him. Now in reality I wasn't really in immediate danger, as I could easily take him, but I don't want to know what he could do. The LED sign of the bus crested the hill before the headlights, which gave me a sense of relief. That would quickly be diminished. Now this guy has stared at me before, but never got on the bus. Tonight he had enough cash. This is when I knew he was following me. I began to head to the back of the bus. He followed. I quickly changed directions and sat near the front. He weaseled his way to the front and quickly took a seat directly across from me. I know this because as I was nodding off, an intense instinct of I'm in danger took over and my eyes shot open. There he was. Ever unblinking, ever staring, ever creepy. Now this part is what has scared me for a bit. For a week and a bit my bus service closed some major stops, without thinking how it would impact anyone. Anyway, the stops closer to my house were closed, so for a couple shifts I had to get off on the stop before. Complaints from the public quickly made the closer stops become available again. He must have not known this. But somehow he did know I got off at the farther stop. This stop is also super sketchy with the streetlight being covered by trees, making this tiny strip of sidewalk black out for a bit. This man goes to get off at the stop before, looks behind, and sees me still seated. I watch in horror as he goes to take his seat again. In that moment, I took my chance and hauled ass out of that bus. He stared at me angrily through the exit doors as the bus pulled away. He tried to follow me off, but was too late. The road I am on is a straight road, so you have a clear line of sight to the next stop. My horror intensified when he did not get off at the next stop. I haven't seen him since and I hope we never meet again. Tomorrow is Another Day by Moonface. I was drawn to the house as if it had its own gravitational pull. It was fine, I was going there anyway. It was a beautiful house, on the top of a small hill in the middle of the small village, surrounded by other smaller houses of the same kind. All the houses looked like they were straight out of a fairy tale. They were Victorian-styled houses, but with a cartoonish look about them. Maybe it was their bright colors? I looked up at the bigger house on the hill, where I was headed. There was something off about it, but hard to put my finger on exactly. Maybe it was the slightly crooked windows, the fact that some of the white painted wooden panels were broader than others. I couldn't tell exactly, but it was beautiful and I couldn't wait to get there. I walked up the hill, up, drawing closer for each step while never letting my gaze slip from the now seemingly towering building, its spires glaring in the sun. Around the house was a tall, metal fence, only just visible through the thick ivy and flowers, climbing and grabbing hold on every inch of the black metal bars. Here and there, you could see the fence's sharp points sticking up through the wild-growing flowers and bushes. The big gate sounded like the screams of 1,000 souls burning in agony when I pushed it open. It was a bit unsettling, but I knew I had to go to the house. Once I entered the garden, a warm, loving feeling grabbed a hold of me. The sun seemed to reach every inch of the gardens. There were no shadows, birds were chirping, the flowers smelled amazing. I stood there, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin and bathed in the glory of the house in front of me. It was a kindergarten, I knew that now. I hadn't thought about it before, but now, it was as if I had always known. As I turned around, I saw the children. They were all dressed in the same uniform, dark blue and white. They stood in a line with their backs to me, waiting to get let in through the big side door around the corner. I knew there was a door. Like I had been there before. Had I? They stood in a line of tallest closest to the door and the smallest in the back, closest to me. I went over and stood in line behind the smallest girl. I noticed that I also had the same uniform. Had I had that the whole time? As I stood there, smiling to be in the presence of the house, the smallest girl turned to face me, and motioned for me to kneel down so she could whisper something in my ear. "You shouldn't stand here. You shouldn't be here, but don't worry. They'll always stab the smallest child last." I thought that sounded terrible, but I couldn't and shouldn't stand there, so I went up front since I was the tallest of them all. The door opened and we went in the house. Slowly, years will go by, flowers will wither and we all will die. Bloody, the same thing each time, nobody's leaving and we all will die. Knives in the dark, this is the mark, for our eternity, stabbed in the heart. Now you have entered, nobody knows why, but flowers will wither, and we all will die. The song came from the children, as they all scattered around the house as if they were playing hide and seek. Were they? It looked like they were trying to hide. The house didn't feel at all like it did from the outside. The air that was just filled with love and the smell of fresh flowers were now thick and smelled like rotten decay. The windows were all boarded up, but you could make out the ivy climbing on the outside of the mold-infested walls like an octopus tentacles, slowly engulfing the once beautiful house, before it would devour it whole. Slowly years will go by. I heard from one direction. I turned my head the other way. The halls were painted dark red, like dried-up blood, illuminated by old lamps mounted on the walls. The floor seemed askew. I walked down the hallway and took a turn. There was a girl, and then there wasn't. I continued down the hall and up the stairs, but they didn't lead anywhere but the ceiling. I heard a distant scream that turned into a whimper and then silence. The night had found its first victim. Tomorrow she would get another chance at being the smallest, because the smallest child gets stabbed last. I looked up at the ceiling again, and now there was a hatch. I hurried towards it and pushed it open. The attic was dark and smelled of death and corpse. Or so I thought. I had never smelled a corpse before. Had I? There was a small round window that the plants from outside hadn't yet covered. I ran towards it. It felt like I was running on a treadmill, only in reverse. The faster I ran, the further away the window got. And then I was there. The window was right in front of me. Bloody, bloody, the same thing each time, it echoed from somewhere in the distance, before another shrilling scream was heard and felt. The night had found its second victim. Tomorrow she would get another chance at being the smallest, because the smallest child gets stabbed last. I looked out the window. The air was cold. I could see my breath, then I couldn't. I let out a scream that seemed to disappear in the night. Help! Tomorrow I would get another chance at being the smallest, because the smallest child gets stabbed last. I woke up in cold sweat. What the hell was that? It had to be the weirdest dream I had ever had. I looked outside. The sun was up. After a quick shower, I went for a walk. I loved our new home. It was a warm, nice little village. I turned a corner, and that's when I saw it. It was a beautiful house, on the top of a small hill. I was drawn to it, as if it had its own gravitational pull. It was fine. I was going there anyway. The Masquerade by Undertale Pacifist 88. Inside the world, there is a ballroom. And in the ballroom, there is a masquerade. People of all ages celebrate inside, wearing dazzling dresses and fine suits. They dance with one another, graceful movements across the floor. Music is played by an orchestra, violins humming and cellos playing fine tunes. The people step in time to the music, colorful fabrics swishing to the tune. Adults drink wine, chattering amongst each other, while children sip juice, giggling and gossiping. Young and old, they are all there inside of the masquerade. They wear intricate masks of all colors, shapes, and sizes. Beautiful and decorative, big and small. Guards stand at the doors, protecting the people inside, leaving them to dance in peace. Isn't this exciting? Isn't this wonderful? The people whisper. This is the most amazing party, the most fun of times. Inside of the world in a ballroom, and inside of the ballroom is a masquerade. Inside of the masquerade is a boy, and this boy looks closely and sees. People of all ages are trapped inside, with tattered dresses and suits made of rags. They dance as their feet split and bleed, their shoes filling with blood. They will only stop when they fall asleep on their feet, and when they wake up, they will continue. Music is played by an invisible orchestra, violins shrieking out and cellos wailing. The people step in time with the music, pulled along by invisible strings. Adults drink wine, rotting their teeth and corroding their lungs, chattering voices hoarse and hopeless. Children choke on juice, poisoning their souls, hissing and sobbing. Young and old, they are all stuck within the masquerade. Intricate masks of all shapes and colors are stuck to their faces, hiding their spirits. Unusual abilities are hidden, pushed so far down beneath the masks that they are invisible to the human eye. Guards stand at the doors, keeping the people inside, and disposing of those who break the masquerade. They are there to keep the peace and to remind the people that they need to keep acting. Pretending. Let us out, we don't belong here, the people beg. We shouldn't be here. We want to go home. Where's my family? My husband, my brother, my sister, my wife? Let us go, let us go. Their voices are merely whispered, and anybody who speaks louder will have no voice at all. Inside the world, there is a ballroom, and in the ballroom, there is a masquerade. Inside the masquerade is a boy who sees, and beside the boy who sees, is a guard who is losing faith. The boy talks to the guard about the dancers, the captives. He talks to the guard about the wine, the poison. He talks to the guard about the music, the torture. The guard listens. Even without a voice, the boy seemed to have one. Inside the world, there is a masquerade. And inside the masquerade, the boy and the guard are gone. The masquerade continues on. College House Experiences by Offaducksback. Hi, I'm a male in my 20s from Ireland, and the incidents I am going to relay to you occurred about 3 years ago. I stress that everything I tell you here is 100% genuine. I have had a few small things happen to me over the years, but I've always wondered about a cluster of incidents which occurred over a very short period whilst I lived in Diggs' house in college. Hopefully someone may be able to shed some insight into what I experienced. It was my first year. I had started college and settled into Diggs accommodation in Dublin, Ireland. Diggs, for anyone who doesn't know, is somewhere students live when in college and usually involves renting a room with a family in their home at a fraction of the cost of college or university accommodation. I was living with an older lady and her 2 adult sons, who were older than me and quite pleasant. The lady herself was nice, although a little old-fashioned, and over the first semester all was well. It wasn't until near the end of my second semester in April that I was left bemused. The first occurrence was something I could only explain as bizarre. It happened when I went to go to the toilet in the middle of the night. I slept upstairs along with the rest of the family. My room was closest to the stairs with the landing shaped in a U. The bathroom was across the hall at the other end of the landing, a good 10 to 15 strides away. I used the toilet and all was well. I tried to be as quiet as possible, returning to my room to not waken anyone. However, I no sooner had the door shut and turned to make the journey back to my room when what I can only describe as a black fog descended on me. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark, and maybe the sudden movements from getting out of bed had caused me to hallucinate, but no. This was more than a trick of the mind. It was almost as if I was able to physically swipe at it with my hands and see it move coherently as I did. I was panicked but didn't feel the need to scream. I tried to fight my way through it, but I barely felt as if I could move. After what felt like 30 to 60 seconds it cleared, but as it did so, it left me dangerously lingering over the top step of the stairs. I could have sworn I took no more than 2 to 3 steps in my panicked daze, but I shook myself down and rushed back into my room, locking the door and leaving the lights on for the rest of the night. The following morning at breakfast, I mentioned nothing and all was normal. Over the next few days everything was fine. Until about a week later. This time it was a dream that scared the living shit out of me. I was asleep in my room when I found myself dreaming of a familiar place. My grandmother's home. The house was a typical two-story Irish farmhouse. It had been renovated about 12 years before my dream, but I was witnessing it as it was when I was young a boy. I can remember taking the details of the old stonework in when the front door opened. It was my grandmother, delighted to see me. "Come in," she exclaimed, greeting me with a hug as she guided me into her home as it was when I was a child pre-renovation. It is at this point that I feel I should disclaim my grandmother had been dead 11 years at this point. She took me to a seat at her kitchen table, made me some tea and a sandwich, and started talking to me. I can't distinctively say what she told me, but I remember it being extremely positive, along the lines of "I'm proud of you and what you've achieved." At this point, I would have been happy for the dream to finish. However, it took a dark twist. I can remember witnessing my grandmother's face beginning to twist and contort into something unrecognizable. I got up to run away, and as I did so, I noticed her feet were not human, but hooves, what I imagine were of a goat's. As this being who was once my grandmother took notice of my horror at their hooves, they echoed a piercing, bellowing screech of laughter, and it was at this point that I awoke. This wasn't like waking from any nightmare or even sleep paralysis. Oh no. I awoke to find myself upright in my bed sobbing uncontrollably, with my digs lady banging on my door to see if I was okay. After a minute or so of composing myself, I threw on my dressing gown and opened the door to chat to her. I could see she was visibly concerned, and it was obvious to her I had been crying. She asked what had happened, and I explained I just had a bad dream. I could see she was apprehensive to even question me further, but I sensed she really wanted to see if I was okay. She looked at me alarmingly and said she had heard me crying for a few minutes. I looked back at her horrified but managed to pass it off with a joke, telling her, "If you didn't laugh at the nightmare I had, you might as well cry." She smiled and told me if I needed anything, just give her a call. I entered my room again, now puzzled at how I could have been crying in my sleep, but I chalked it off as a freak episode and got myself ready for college. A day later, I returned back to my family home for the weekend and told my mother of the dream about my grandmother. I left out the eerie ending, and she simply told me to recite a few Hail Marys for my grandmother. That was a Saturday, and that night the final incident of this saga occurred. Again, it happened while I was asleep, but this time in my own bed in my own house. I woke up too early in the morning to my liking for a Sunday. I looked at my watch on my bedside locker to see it was 5. I was still half asleep, but I could feel a burning sensation coming from my legs. I gave my leg an instinctive itch and was ready to roll over and go back to sleep. However, when I touched my leg, I immediately could feel what could only be described as a 7/8 inch long scratch mark on my inner thigh. It was the kind of scratch you'd associate with an animal, but my dog didn't sleep inside our house. It was quite obviously fresh, and my own nails were much too blunt from biting them to even attempt to cause a mark so striking. I have a photo of the scratch on my old phone somewhere, but I remember the photo didn't do it justice. I kind of ignored this incident, and a week later I moved out of my digs house, and I have not had any kind of experiences, even remotely as wild as those since. At the time I was at a loss for an explanation, and to this day I still am. I never brought up anything that happened with my digs family nor my own family, apart from telling my mom a vague version of my dream. I would be interested in hearing people's opinions on my stories, and I also would like to stress I wasn't under any form of influence from drugs or alcohol at the time. Nor was I reading or practicing any sort of occult material, and I actually attended Roman Catholic Mass weekly with my own family. Have any of you experienced anything similar? If you've made it this far, I genuinely would like to thank you for your attention. That was all for today. Glad you guys listened till the end. Don't forget to like the video and share with your friends. Also send in your own scary stories at horroxperiencemedia@gmail.com so your work can get featured in my videos. You can find the link in the description. Subscribe for more similar stories and see you guys in the next video.